Hey there, Veronia. How are you?
I'm great, thank you, Audrey. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you. Welcome to the podcast. I'm glad to have you on and very excited to talk about some of the things we're going to talk about today. Um, but before we kind of jump in, I want to hear a little bit about you and who you are and where you're from, because obviously there's an accent detected there. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I'm sure you could probably tell from the accent. So my name is Veronia Spain, and I am from London, the UK, across the pond. And I'm essentially a money coach who helps, I like to say, professional spenders save and invest more money so they can start working towards financial independence. And part of the reason why I decided to become a money coach is because I am also naturally a spender myself, and I ended up being in quite a lot of debt. It was about $22,000 worth of debt, and I ended up paying that off in 18 months. And I learned how to save and do all of those things. So I've been helping my clients do the same thing.
Wow. Okay. So let's first of all, let's define because I might be I might be convicted here. Let's define what a professional spender is because I might immediately have to change some of my habits. I don't know. We'll see. How are you defining a professional spender?
Yeah, so I define a professional spender as someone who is a working professional. So typically they probably are in a 9 to 5, maybe they're working in corporate and they're making decent money when it comes to their salary. However, they would consider themselves as natural spenders. They've maybe not really saved any money in the past, or maybe they've saved in the past, but something has happened where they've had to use that money and then they've struggled to save again. And so they're really at the point where they are making this money, but they're not seeing where that money is going. So that's what I would probably say is a professional spender.
Okay. Okay. So not seeing where their money is going. They're making decent money, so it's not like it's necessarily paycheck to paycheck, but they could be living paycheck to paycheck because they're not spending their money wisely. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Got it. Got it. Okay, whew. I think I'm okay there. I thought you were
You're
gonna
okay.
say, yeah. I thought you were gonna say, yeah, if you have Amazon packages showing up every other day, you would have got me on that, but probably. Okay. Okay, so professional spender, someone who, as you said, makes some money, maybe don't have savings, or as you said, maybe some emergency. They had a savings, but an emergency came up. They had to use that money for some type of emergency, and now are struggling to um, build up their reserves again. And so can you tell me what are some of the things that you find that people are spending their money on?
Ooh, well, I would say, I think especially for people that make a decent amount of money, a lot of it is probably on food. And I wouldn't even just say groceries. We I think we'll probably talk about this, but especially clients that I've worked with in the past, because they're working, quite long hours, they're quite busy. By the time they get home, the last thing they want to be doing is cooking up a meal from scratch. So what they tend to do is they'll probably order off Uber Eats, for example, and get a takeout instead. But then sometimes they don't realize how often they do it and they end up spending a lot of money. And at the end of the month, they don't realize that they've spent so much money on the food. And I think for me, the one thing is the fact that they don't actually like that. They would prefer not to spend as much money on takeout, for example. But then there's things where, because of the lack of time, they've had to do that. I would also say, to be honest, maybe things like travel. A lot of my clients or people will spend money on travel, but I necessarily wouldn't say that's a bad thing. I think traveling is great, and I also travel myself. I think the question is whether you are happy with the money that you spent with travel. And sometimes what I find is people won't be 100% honest when they go out traveling, because obviously, people have been working long hours, they need a break. But when they travel, they don't tell themselves, oh, I think I'm actually going to spend this amount of money. They kind of say, I don't think I'm going to spend anything. And then they end up spending more than what they anticipated. And then they feel bad when they return back home and then go back to work because they've realized, oh, I spent all this money. I've probably used credit card debt, for example, and now I've got to work on paying this off. And now I have to do all of these extra hours maybe to pay that off. So I think those are probably the two biggest things I would say.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I think food is a big one. It's interesting. I am often amazed at how often people eat out or do like the, especially now it's so easy to do the DoorDash and the Uber Eats and the all that. Just,
Yeah.
okay. And when you say decent amount, well, I mean, I think certainly that's a variable, but do you have in terms of your clients, is there a particular requirement for how much money that they make before they can work with you? Does that matter?
No, I would say personally for me, income doesn't matter if you don't have really, really high expenses. So, for example, I have worked with people that earn under $30,000, but because they don't have really high expenses, we can still help them to save. But I've also had people that are on the higher end where you're maybe close to six figures and you still want to be able to save, some of them may have also been living paycheck to paycheck as well. So for me, the income element doesn't necessarily matter. I think it's what you do with the money that counts. That's what I'm 100% able to help people with, because even when I paid off my debt, I was actually earning probably about $30,000 at the time. So I didn't actually start off with a huge salary when I started really focusing on my finances.
Okay. Yeah, and then for you, what you do primarily is help clients save. So that's your so it's not, well, and then I guess as a part of that, they just, are they saving for anything in particular to pay off debt? Do you help them with that as well? Or is your kind of your promise is, listen, work with me and you're going to have 6 months reserve, or tell me what is it, if I want to
Yeah.
come to you, why would I come to you?
Yeah. So essentially, what I help my clients do is I help them to save at least 1K every 30 days. Now, what we do with that 1K will depend on their circumstance. So, my philosophy is essentially when you know how to save, you can do anything with money. You can use those savings to pay off your debt. You can use those savings to fund for your down payment on your house or build an emergency fund, buy a car. You can start using those savings to even invest for your future. So, if you want to start thinking about investing in the stock market, that's also something that you can do. But what I truly believe is that it all starts with saving. When you know how to save, and specifically, I help them save that 1K first. When you know how to save that, it's easy for you to then start thinking about doing other things with money as well.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting because there are a lot of other kind of money gurus that they focus first on, that's first we got to get rid of debt. That's the first
Yes.
thing that they talk about before they even talk about saving.
Yeah.
And my husband and I, we've gone back and forth on this and just around what our thoughts and how we manage our money. But tell me why you then, and well, I think you just said it. Once you know how to save, you can do whatever you need. It doesn't matter if it's paying off debt or planning for that trip or planning for your kids' college or whatever, investing in your future, your home. So I think that's an interesting twist, because I think we get all, people can get so nervous about, I've got so much debt, so much debt, so much debt, that they're not necessarily they feel like they can't save until they get out of debt.
Yes. The reason why I also say this is because when I started off having debt, I had a maxed out overdraft. It was about 2K. And I would always try to pay off the overdraft, but then something would come up, like my car would break down. I would have to pay to fix my car. And so, because I didn't have any savings to begin with, I would then have to go back to my overdraft. And then I obviously felt bad because I thought, oh, I've done all of this hard work and it's for nothing because I've had to go back into my overdraft. And so, what I realized is that, oh no, I actually have to learn how to save first. And I actually have to build a small amount of savings so that if anything else does happen, I at least have my savings to fall back on rather than falling back on my debt. And so
Mm.
then what I realized is actually, if I can continue to do that skill and I know how to save money and I can build up my savings, I can then pay off my debt just like that really quickly without then having to think about, oh, I'm dipping back into my overdraft or, oh, I'm using credit card debt again.
Yeah, because that is a vicious cycle to
Yeah.
be in. you're if because if you're focused so much on the debt, and then when something else inevitably happens, as you said, it comes up, then you're right back into that again. So maybe it's about learning how to manage the debt a little bit longer, having the debt. And we
Yes.
make debt such a bad thing, and it's certainly not a great thing. But
Hmm.
if we are not managing the money well, then again, that just becomes a vicious cycle. So okay, I appreciate that. I like that perspective. And so tell me then, what is when you're working with people, is that something of a reframe you need to help your clients with? Is that something that's hard for them to change their mind around? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I would probably say that 60% of my clients tend to have debt, and then I'd say the other 40% don't. They just don't have any savings. But the biggest things that clients always come to me first is they're like, "Oh, Veronia, I want to save. Like I want to learn how to save." And then when we get into the coaching container, they instantly think, "Oh, I should be focusing on paying off my debt first. I just need to get rid of my debt." So we do then have to have the conversation where I kind of have to teach them, if you just focus on your debt but you have no other savings, you will probably continue to be in debt if something happens. So, what I then have to teach them is just hold on for a second. Let's learn how to actually save that money. And when they get consistent with saving that money, they can then start to either attack that debt, or it could be that they build up their savings for other things as well, maybe other expenses, so that they don't end up going back into debt as well. So essentially the whole skill that they're using, they're going to be using it for everything, so they really do get used to it.
Okay. And what do you think is behind the focus on the debt? Because they're coming to you for savings, but then as
Mm.
you said, they get into the coaching container, and then now they're all stressed out about, well, I've got to get rid of the debt. Where do you think that stems from, or why do you think that is?
I think partly it's probably just some, maybe from parents, for example, where their parents have maybe said, "Oh no, you should never have debt. You shouldn't be in credit card debt." And you've probably seen on news articles or maybe even social media. But I think one thing that I also have to teach them is that you also have to remember, you paying off the debt is not the end destination. So even when I was in debt, I wasn't just thinking, "Oh, I need to really get rid of these payments," because, for me personally, part of the reason why I wanted to get rid of my debt is because I had, at my work, they were doing layoffs, they were restructuring the business.
Mm,
And so I was kind of thinking, "Oh, if I get laid off today, how on earth am I going to make my car payment? How on earth am I going to pay off my overdraft?" But then also, partly the reason why I started saving to pay off my debt was because I realized that, oh no, this is just a part of my journey that I need to do in order for me to start investing for my future. So what I get them to realize is that, yes, the debt is there, and some of that debt may be expensive, but that isn't your whole journey. That's not your end destination. That's just the beginning. So once you're able to save, you're able to start paying off that debt, there are other things that you will be looking forward to that you can focus on. And part of the first steps is really just saving to pay off that debt.
hmm Yeah, and that's an interesting reframe. Is because a lot of times people go, "Oh, if I can just get out of debt, then that's it. That's all. That I've
Mhm.
reached the pinnacle," and that, as you said, that really is just the beginning. Because then what? Then what do you do at that
Exactly.
point? And then moving forward, for sure. And even as you're thinking about, well, the other thing that I was thinking about with this whole debt thing, I think there's a lot of shame that comes with having debt. I think there's a lot of insecurity that comes with having debt. I think people can feel bad about themselves. I shouldn't have debt. I shouldn't have
Mm.
this debt. Um, and whether that's messaging from, our childhood, or as you said, whatever we're seeing out there. And which then, when you're operating from a place of the shame and the discouragement, you tend to spend more to kind of fill
Exactly.
that. And so I think that's probably another reason why people hang out there for a while. And I also think, and I'm just curious if you talk to your clients about, because not all debt is bad debt. Do you differentiate the kinds of debt, and what certain debt that's okay to have for a little while? Do you talk about that or get into that with your clients?
Yeah, so I would even probably say that, like, look, at the end of the day, debt is also a tool, just as money is a tool. So it really depends on what you're using it for and who do you want to benefit. So, for example, when it comes to credit card companies, I see, I wouldn't say like, oh, that's really bad debt, but at the end of the day, you have to think about who's kind of making most of the money. It's the credit card company, right? They're charging like 20% interest. So you have to then ask yourself, is it benefiting you or is it benefiting the credit card company? Whereas if you then decided to buy a property to rent out to a tenant and you got a mortgage from that, the bank is making money, but you're also making money from that too. So I always try to ask the question, when it comes to debt, who is benefiting from it? And that will then give you an understanding to see whether the debt that you have is good or bad,
Mm.
essentially. And then what should you then prioritize? If, for example, you find actually the debt's probably not benefiting you that much, then that's probably why you then want to prioritize paying it off.
Yeah, because if you're spending 20%, 10%, whatever, the interest rate on some clothes you bought 6 months ago that you don't even wear anymore, that's not working for you. You're only
Exactly.
paying the credit card for, the capital that they let you use. And really, that's the fee that you're paying them to let you use their capital. But yes, you're right. So, but if you have some kind of investment property that's actually earning you some money, and if it's earning you more than what you're paying in interest, then that's a win-win for you as well. And I do think that's interesting because there are people that most people with money, a lot of times, especially when they're investing, they're not using their own money; they're using somebody else's money. I think that's
Exactly.
another thing that we forget that you can have the lots of people with a lot of money, they don't put themselves out there using their own money. They use other people's money in order to
Yep.
make them money. So they're doing the same thing that the credit card or these lenders do, banks, for example. They'll use their capital to make them money and then pay them back. And then I'm
Yep.
out nothing. So when you can reach that point of saving, being stable enough, and now I can be smart about the kind of debt that I use and then somehow get a return on that debt investment, then it's smart debt versus, just your basic consumer debt, things that if you're putting, as you said, your DoorDash or your Uber Eats on your credit card and not paying that off, you're paying for a meal that you had, a month ago that probably wasn't that good anyway. So now, not only, and
Exactly.
probably very expensive. So now you're
Hmm.
also paying how much more for that. Those are the things we need to shift out of and then working more smartly with certainly saving. And if we need to get into debt, understanding what kind of debt is going to be beneficial.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, as we were talking and thinking about this aspect of the money, I kind of correlated it a little bit with time because when I work with my clients, one of the things, especially now that I'm working with them on, is managing their time, managing their calendar. And I've been able to correlate a bit how they manage their time says a lot about how they manage their mindset. And I would imagine that that's true with money as well. I think there's a lot of parallels between time and money. There's a lot of correlation between time and money. Am I onto something? Would you say that that's true for you as well?
Yeah, I agree. And I think how you manage your time has an impact on how you manage your mindset as well as how you manage your money. I think it all interlinks because sometimes you might have people say, oh, I don't have time to look at my finances, or
Mm,
I don't have time to maybe, like do a spending plan or some type of budget. I don't have time to do that. And so if you don't have time for anything else in your life, well then no wonder you may be struggling with managing your money because of that time element, and partly because of maybe the mindset where you maybe think it takes a lot of time to maybe do some type of spending plan or budget or to sort out your finances. So I definitely agree. And actually, Audrey, I'd be curious to know from your perspective, what other reasons are why people struggle with time? Well,
mm.
I would love to know actually your clients, what do they say that they struggle with when it comes to time?
Yeah. Well, the first thing they say is there's not enough. And you hear that. I think that also you hear that with money as well. I think it's because not setting boundaries. So, especially with the leaders that I work with, they are mid-level to executive level leaders, and they're managing big projects, or they have a relatively large team that they're working with, or even as high-level individual contributors, they just have these big projects that they're working on that's taking up a lot of their time. A lot of them are not working, they're working not 40 hours, but 60 hours, 65 hours, their weekends, and it's hard for them to even just take a little bit of time out of their schedule to do some of the fundamental things for themselves. So part of that is, one, creating boundaries, having a hard time saying no because they think that they need to say yes to everything and everybody. Well, it's my boss, I have to do that. Do you? Let's talk about that. Well, it's my team, I have to have a an open door and they should be able to come to me at any time about anything. Really? Is that because then how are you doing the things that you need to do for the future? So there's a lot of um not parallels, there's a lot of polarities. So how much time I spend, for others versus how much time I spend and have for myself. And one of the things I have them do is look at their calendar and go, I bet that I can carve out 10 to 20% of your calendar. Are you doing things you shouldn't even be doing at all? And so part of it is just that, not even understanding where they should be spending their time. Because even when we get into these conversations, sometimes clients, well, what am I supposed to do then? Because they're so caught in the day to day and the operations. But then they come to me and they go, well, but I want to be more of a strategic thinker. I want to be this kind of leader. I want to be that kind of leader. But they're still holding on to all the things that got them there, not realizing you have to let those things go to get you to the next step. So, and a lot of that, I think, again, not how many times people go, there's not enough time, there's not enough money. Huge parallel
Yeah,
there. Where did it all go? Where did all the time go? Where did all the money go? Huge parallel there.
100%.
Right? Especially for people that have kids, and it's like not saying no. Or those who do, especially for those who do, the one in their family that's doing well, and then there's that pressure, or you feel obligated to help and give out so much of what you bring in. That's also a challenging boundary for people as well. I think that's very similar, for money and their time. So yeah, so I think there's a lot there. And while I don't necessarily deal specifically with their money, I'm curious now, after we talk, I'm gonna start asking a little bit more. I'm gonna start asking a few more questions about how their finances. We talk about it at the
Mm.
beginning, and then if it's in a place that it's not where they don't want it to be, then we can dive into it a little bit. But that's interesting. Yeah, I would love to have a little bit more of correlation there because I think there's a lot.
Yeah, I agree, and I think people don't realize how uh, in correlation that they are when, if you're, for example, struggling with managing your money or you're struggling with saving, it's probably because you're struggling to find the time to do it. And I really like the idea of being able to set boundaries as well. Boundaries when you're at work, maybe boundaries when you're at home, to be able to carve some of the time out. But I also think it's a mindset thing where we spend so much time telling ourselves that we don't have time, when during that time that we were saying that, we could have been doing something.
Yes, yes, it is 100% a mindset thing. Or yeah, you're because sometimes you get into decision fatigue, and the time that you're
Yeah.
oscillating and trying to go back and forth between things. Yeah, that time, if you had just picked something and moved forward with it, you would be halfway done, and maybe you would have had time to do both. So for sure, for sure, for sure. And I think another thing though I was thinking about as well is this correlation between money and time, and even with careers, is people want, for example, because not everyone that I work with is trying to continue to move up. Well, most people are kind of reaching and wanting to do greater things in their career. And, um, but part of that is, well, if I make more money, then I'll have more time. But then they
Yeah.
realize that's also a trap. We don't get there because the more money you make, a lot of times, especially when you don't have boundaries, especially when you don't know how to manage your time, the more responsibility you have, the more time you're spending.
Yeah.
So you have to learn, just like what you're talking about, same thing. It's just it's amazing. And you're talking about, well, if I got debt, if I have debt, if I only focus on, you know, getting rid of the debt, I then get myself in trouble because as emergencies come up, I stay in the debt and I have to. Same thing with people who are wanting to make more money. If I just focus on wanting to make more money, then I put myself in a situation that might require me to do things um, and in a higher position, but I'm focusing on the wrong things. And so yeah, it's very interesting. So learning how to, again, as I said, create those boundaries, manage your mindset around it. What are the things that are really needed of you at that level? Uh, that makes all the difference. And you can have more and more freedom. It's a different kind of freedom, but you can have that and can achieve it if you can reframe and manage how you think about where you're spending your time, your energy, because if you have a whole team and you're doing all the things that your team is doing, then why do they need you? If you're just going to keep doing the same things that they're doing, they need
Exactly.
you to be doing a different role. They need you to be doing something differently. So, yeah, yeah, it's funny. I think the other thing that comes up when I quit my job, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but when I started talking about, hey, I'm going to start my practice and quit my job, and conversations with my husband and even afterwards, some colleagues, well, how's it going? And even I had a conversation with my sister, who she was like, how's it going? And I said, yeah. So this was probably within the first year that I quit. And I said, things are going well, and it's going to take me some time to get back to where I was in terms of my revenue matching or exceeding what I
Hmm.
was making. And she just was shaking her head because she was like, I would love to try and do that, but I just make too much money. And I can't let that go and try and go after something that I really desire to do. I think that that's also interesting. And so to you, if you help people to save, they probably could put themselves in a better position to do the kinds of things that they'd like to do. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And that's so funny because I remember when I was working in my corporate job and I wanted to take some time off work, after COVID. I wanted to be able to explore different things, start thinking about doing things with my business and start doing other things really and just live in the present. And I wanted to do that. And I actually remember I planned to quit my job, so I'd already handed in my notice because they told me, you can quit your job and then you can come back when you're ready. And one of my colleagues, it was actually two people that came to me and they said, "Oh, what does your husband do?" And I was kind of confused why they were asking this. And I told them my husband's job, and it's just, it's a normal job. And they were asking me because they couldn't understand how I could afford to take time out of work.
Mm.
And they literally asked me, "How are you doing this?" And I said, "I have savings." And they were so shocked because they kept saying, "I would have bills to pay." And I said, "Yeah, I've got bills to pay too, but I've also got savings. So that's why I can afford to do it." So that's why I'm also really passionate when you have savings. Things like being able to take some time out to pursue projects or spend more time with family or do whatever you want to do. You can do that without then having to worry about, oh, I need to still make money so that I can pay for my bills. You don't have that worry anymore because you have those savings, and then you can take your time to then go back into whatever you want to do. So yeah, I definitely resonate with that kind of saying because yeah, a lot of people do think it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So tell me then, so without giving away all your secret sauce, like what are one or two things for folks who are listening? What are maybe one or two things that they can start doing immediately, very practical, maybe very small, very tangible, that they can start doing in order to get them on the path of saving?
Yeah, so I would say that one tip is you want to be able to just plan for your expenses. So you want to know how much your bills come to, you want to know how much do you roughly spend. And I think some people think that this takes a really long time and it's very laborious because you have to go through all your bank statements. But we're in a technological world where banking apps and budgeting apps can do this for you. They can literally tell you how much you spent last month, and they can even give you categories to tell you you spent this much on eating out, this you spent this much on, transport. And so when you have those numbers, it's easier for you to then plan out what you're going to do in the next month, and you're able to save money because you know how much you typically spend and you know how much your other bills come to. So this exercise doesn't need to take long, especially if you use those types of apps. It probably can take you less than 10 minutes. And you can then plan out how much you then want to save during that month. And you would be surprised at how many savings you can make just by having a look at what you spent and your numbers, because then you could probably find areas where you've realized, oh, actually, I don't really want to spend money on that area. I don't really want to do that. Or I have a subscription that I'm paying for and I don't remember the last time I've used it. So things like that will instantly give you a pay rise, and you can then use that for your savings without you then having to completely restrict yourself from spending, because you'll then be spending money on things that you actually like, and the rest of that money you can then put towards your savings.
Yeah. Well, the trick is when you find those little subscriptions or things that you no longer want is to put it away and not then go spend it on something else. A lot of times people go, "Oh, free money. Now I can go no, that bag that I was looking at. Now I can go get that." Versus, no, I'm going to remove this and then put it into. And so do and do you get into recommending any kind of just a savings account in your bank? Do you talk about throwing it in an IRA? Do you talk about, so where should they put this extra, even if it's just a few dollars a week or a few dollars a
Hmm.
month, where do you recommend that they put it?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say that the savings account, as long as it's liquid, you can pull the money out if you need it, then that's obviously something that you can look at. There are different, high yield savings account. A quick Google will give you what the rates are doing, and that counts for, most Western countries anyway. But I would say the most important part really is actually getting used to being able to take some money and pay yourself first, save the money first. And then, of course, once you've done that, it gives you free reign to spend the rest of the money because you know you've already prioritized your savings first. So I
Mm.
would say that's probably the most important thing, because you don't want to spend too much time thinking, oh, what savings account should I save my money into? If you're spending so much time doing that, then you're not saving. So pick a high yield savings account, whichever one, have a quick Google. But then the best thing is when you're getting paid, make sure that you're prioritizing your savings first. And that then gives you the freedom to spend after.
Yeah, that's a good point. Prioritizing the saving. So, you get paid and government, all the things are automatically taken out. And then all the things. And I think the other thing is people don't, as you said this early on, people don't realize their discretionary income. Like things like food, that's discretionary. You get to decide how much money you spend on food. But I
Exactly.
think sometimes they also can feel like, so I think it's also important. Well, you tell me, is it also important to know the difference between what's discretionary and what's not? Like things like gas in your car, you don't control how much gas is. So if you got to go
Hmm.
somewhere, so that's not discretionary unless you're going to stop going places. But the things that are discretionary that you're just spending that you absolutely control, that's probably where you need to be spending the most amount of time. Those subscriptions, those all of those things, the workout, and especially, and I'm curious, I know we're kind of 4 years, well, 4 years from 2020, but 2 years since things started opening up again. I wonder how many things people purchased or did during that time that they're still paying for. some of those subscriptions
Yes.
and things like that. And I think the other thing is being cautious of, especially with all these mergers with the subscription base. So, you've got Hulu and Disney, but isn't it now just one? Do you need to have, be paying for both of them? I don't know. I'm getting ahead of myself. But anyway, but I like what you said about prioritizing saving, because I think a lot of people put that last, or one of the last things they think about. Once they do everything else, then they think about, well, what's left, versus no, let me pull out my savings first and then I can spend. Now I know what's left and I don't have to worry about or feel bad about where I'm spending. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think especially as someone who is a natural spender, I really like the concept of saving that money first, because then it's out of the way. And so I know the amount of money I have left, I can spend it on anything that I like. Even if I do, sometimes I have my impulse spending and my husband will just be looking at me like I'm crazy. But because I've already saved that money first, it doesn't matter. So if I
Mm,
want to impulse spend on something random and I want to buy something from Amazon, and you see some deliveries, it doesn't matter because I've already paid myself first. I've already saved that money first. So I've focused on, the future that I have. So, the rest of the money can, if it goes a little out of the way, it's fine. It's okay.
yeah, great, great. That's fantastic. So, Verona, how do people find you? And tell me a little bit about how do you work with people? How do they find you? Do you do one-on-one? Do you do a program? Like, what do you offer?
Yes. Yes. So I offer one-on-one coaching. So it's a 6-month coaching program. Again, it's designed to help you save at least 1K every 30 days. And you can use that to either pay off debt, or you can use it for a house down payment, or even start focusing on investing through the stock market. And so, as I mentioned, I tend to help professional spenders, as I like to say, but it's really people that are working professionals that want to be able to save a lot more money, especially because they have specific goals that they want to hit, or if they want to pay off debt. And you can find me on YouTube. So my name is Veronia Spain on YouTube. I'm on Instagram as well. And then I also have a weekly series on my email list that people can join too.
Okay, and we'll put all those links in the show notes for folks to find you as well. So,
Perfect.
all right, Veronia. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I think that, I think what I like about just simplifying it down to, don't worry about, yes, you need to worry about the debt, but that is not the most important thing. The most important thing is learning how to save. And even if you have to or find yourself in debt later, you have the money, you have the capacity, you know what you need to do to get out of it. And I think it's a parallel for so many other things. And same thing with, I think the time thing. I think the same thing with, even when we think about our health and wellness, sometimes we fall off the rail. But if you know how to get back there, you don't have to worry so much about that. And so I think this is just one of those fundamentals that, as we shift our mindset around it, it helps us for the future rather than focusing on just what we have today. So thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.